Jessica Devnani and Patrick De La Cerda were living a love story that felt straight out of a fairy tale. They'd met online in June 2017, and their bond grew so strong that they got engaged quite quickly. They had even plans to settle down in West Palm near Patrick's mom. Patrick had picked out a stunning engagement ring, ready to pop the marriage proposal officially. But life, with its cruel twists, never gave him the chance. It was the morning of February 27, 2018. Patrick's dad called him, telling him that there was a package waiting at the gate. Maybe, just maybe, that would be the ring, he thought. And that morning turned out to be the beginning of a nightmare. On the other hand, Jessica had been feeling uncomfortable for a while at her home, as Patrick did not call her as usual that morning. Past threats against Patrick haunted her mind. Her gut screamed that something was wrong. Without hesitation, she left work and sped to his house. When she got there, the gate was locked, but that did not stop her. She climbed over it and rushed inside. That's when she found him. The scene was horrific. Patrick was ambushed by a brutal gunshot that smashed her whole world in a moment. Patrick was hit with multiple gunshots in the head, face, chest, and hip. It was not some random act of violence, but a calculated and a cold-blooded hit. But who killed Patrick, and why? Does he had any powerful longtime enemy who could murder him? You see, questions are many, and the answers we have to find out. Detective Chad Weaver was at his home in Volusia County, Florida, when he got the call. A neighbor had dialed 911, speaking in a quivering voice describing what they'd seen. He's cold. They had confirmed that Patrick was already dead by the time they arrived. The police immediately knew it was no random burglary gone wrong. It had all the signs of a targeted killing. At the scene, they found 25-year-old Patrick lying near the front door, riddled with gunshot wounds. The glass door was busted and blood was all over everywhere, while it seemed like it might have come right through the glass door. Since it was clear that someone had planned this move for a long time, down to the last detail, Detective Weaver had a gut feeling this case wasn't going to be easy. Sheriff's deputies, their body cameras rolling, already arrived at the sprawling 9-acre property in Deltona, unsure if the killer was still lurking nearby. While Weaver was getting started, some deputies went to talk to Patrick's fiancée, Jessica Devnani. She was a mess, pacing back and forth in the yard. It was heartbreaking to see. Just 2 months ago, Patrick had proposed to her right there, and their relationship had been picture perfect. They met on a dating app, hit it off immediately, and everything moved fast from there. Patrick, ever the romantic, even had a custom engagement ring made for Jessica, and she had also just gotten out of an 8-year relationship, and somehow Patrick seemed like a clean slate. She worked at a bank as a teller, and Patrick worked for his father in construction as well. But something went wrong on February 26, 2018. That evening, Patrick recorded a suspicious voicemail for Jessica. He said how much he loved her and promised that he would call her when morning broke. However, that morning never arrived for Jessica. Quite suspiciously, Patrick's dad also received a strange phone call in which someone was inquiring if he had a son. And the next thing Max knew, this shocking tragedy happened. The body of Patrick was lying in a position that showed clearly he'd been shot at close range, and the killer had stood right there when they pulled the trigger. The gunshot trajectory confirmed it, and whoever did this also stole Patrick's computer, his camera, and even the hard drive from his security system. Clearly, the killer wanted to cover their tracks. Nearby, investigators found shell casings from 300 blackout ammunition, the kind used in semi-automatic rifles like an AR-15. So this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone wanted Patrick dead, but why? It wasn't like Patrick didn't have enemies. In 2017, he'd had a run-in with a neighbor who fired shots during a trespassing dispute. Thankfully, Patrick wasn't hurt, but it raised eyebrows. For a moment, that neighbor seemed like a solid lead, but it didn't pan out. The guy was already in custody on the day Patrick was murdered. That left the detectives at a dead end, wondering who else had a motive to kill Patrick. At this point, researchers uncovered some voicemails that implicated straight at a guy Patrick and Jessica both knew really well. As it turns out, this guy had been following Jessica around for a while, making her super uneasy. Detective Weaver figured out that Jessica might have some idea of who could have had a grudge against Patrick. And that is when Jessica gave them a name, Gregory Bender. Bender was her ex, Apparently, Bender wasn't exactly thrilled over her being with Patrick, and that made him a prime suspect. But Jessica spilled more details to Detective Weaver, saying she had recently broken up with Bender after an 8-year roller coaster of a relationship. Bender was not taking it well at all. He couldn't let go Jessica and started lurking around her life, trying to control everything. Bender and Jessica had met back in 2009 when Jessica was much younger, and Bender was 42. He was already living the high life. He was this flashy hedge fund manager with a $750,000 house near Orlando, fast cars, and an almost obsessive love for guns. At first, Jessica was completely swept off her feet by him. He was smooth, smart, and knew how to make an impression. However, as time went by, his possessiveness began to come out. It became worse when Jessica briefly dated someone else. And in the end, Bender lost it. He stalked the guy, described exactly where he lived, and even threatened him. Jessica was more scared about what Bender might do to others than what he'd do to her. Despite all the red flags, Jessica stuck around. A few years into their relationship, she even said yes when he proposed. Maybe it was love, maybe it was her not wanting to start over, but she stayed. But then came the bombshell in early 2016. Jessica went to visit Bender in the hospital for some procedure he was having. When she walked into the room, there was another woman sitting there. The woman introduced herself as Damara Sanchez, Bender's wife. Naturally, this was a shocking moment for Jessica. She was floored. She showed Damara her engagement ring, and Damara also calmly showed her a wedding ring. It was like a nightmare. But to his face, when Jessica confronted Bender, he dismissed it with the stroke of a hand. He said they were married for convenience, that was the reason, for Damara's son's sake, so he would be in a better school district. But for Jessica, that was it. The guy she thought she knew was lying to her all this time, and that's true. At first, Bender claimed his marriage to his wife was just for business, but that turned out to be a lie. Jessica, tired of his games, told him to get a divorce by the end of the year. When he didn't, she ended things with him in 2017 and started dating Patrick the very next month. But even though she had moved on, Jessica couldn't get rid of the feeling that Bender would freak out if he found out that she was in a relationship. Sure enough, 5 months later, Bender came across Jessica and Patrick's social media accounts and started stalking them. He was sending Patrick creepy, threatening messages like, "I know where you live, I'm coming for you," and even left voicemails talking about violence, saying he might hire a hitman or do the job himself. Jessica and Patrick were terrified, so they took these threats to court, and a judge slapped a restraining order on Bender, making him hand over his guns. For a while, Bender seemed to back off, and Jessica and Patrick thought they were safe. But that peace didn't last long. On the morning of Patrick's murder, Bender called Jessica's work for the first time in months. Jessica didn't pick up, but just getting the call made her nervous. The detectives, now suspicious of Bender's connection to Patrick's death, had Jessica call him back while they listened in. When she did, Bender pretended to be innocent, saying he saw news regarding Patrick's murder and wished to assist in an investigation. Jessica reminded him of the threats he'd uttered, but Bender played them down, denying that he had ever said such things. The dodgy answers he produced and the obvious contradictions raised the investigators' suspicions even higher. Although Bender completely denied being involved in Patrick's murder, the investigators still found enough evidence to arrest him, but for a different crime. They arrested him for breaking a restraining order after he called Jessica twice on workdays. So while Gregory Bender was already in custody, there wasn't much that linked him to the murder of Patrick De La Cerda, until one day Detective Weaver got an unexpected call. It was from the attorney representing Bender's ex-wife, Damara Sanchez. Turns out Damara had some pretty important information for the case. At first, Damara didn't want to bring her house into it, but she agreed to meet Weaver at a neutral spot. There she revealed something huge. Back in December 2017, not long after her separation and move, she found something in a spiral notebook. It looked like a murder plan, detailed notes written by Bender himself, describing how he planned to kill Patrick. The instructions were chilling, methods, directions, everything. When Damara confronted Bender about it, he just laughed it off as some fantasy. She figured it was nothing and pushed it aside. But when Patrick was murdered, exactly like the notebook described, She knew she had to speak up. This new information gave the cops enough reason to get a search warrant for Bender's place in Orange County, Florida. On 28 February 2018, Detective Weaver searched through the location and found a few crumpled-up papers in the trash. Upon testing them, they were identical to what Damara had described, being a step-by-step guide to Patrick's killing. The notes included Patrick's address and further instructions on how to commit the crime and how to cover it up. To cover the shoes with duct tape, to turn off phones, and then discard the clothes afterwards. The kicker? At the crime scene, they found a sketch from the notebook that showed the layout of the property, with a clear path through the woods. This was the route that Bender would have used to get close to Patrick without being noticed. As a result, the notebook linked him straight to the murder. When ammunition matching the bullets at the crime scene was found on him, that sealed the deal for investigators. 300 blackout was what shot Patrick De La Cerda 4 times. There was no way Bender would stand a chance, but here's the thing. At the crime scene, they only found 2 shell casings. It wasn't much to go on. Then during a search of Gregory Bender's place, something important turned up. A shell casing in a desk drawer. They ran tests on it, and guess what? It was a perfect match with the ones found at the crime scene. Now, although they never did find the real gun, Bender's ex-girlfriend, Jessica Devnani, recalled seeing an AR-15 at his place. The police assumed maybe Bender had thrown it in a lake somewhere. With this, the cops put together a theory. Bender was hiding in the bushes outside Patrick's house. He called Patrick, claiming to be a delivery guy. Patrick, thinking he had a package waiting, came to the door, and that's when Bender shot him dead. Not long after, the cops issued an arrest warrant. Less than 2 days after Patrick's murder, they caught Bender at home right after he got out of jail for breaking a restraining order. But here's the kicker. There wasn't enough solid proof yet. No gun, no witnesses, and no DNA to connect Bender directly to the murder. His defense team was going to shut down Jessica's credibility, bringing up some undercover footage from months before the murder, showing her with Bender. As soon as the trial began, prosecutor Ashley Terwilliger portrayed the murder as a cold and calculated affair. Patrick had been shot 4 times, head, face, chest, and hip, but Bender's defense attorney, Richard Parker, was not having it. He said the case for the prosecution was not that solid because, he said, other people could have had the motive and opportunity to kill Patrick. The prosecution brought in Jessica, their key witness, and she painted Gregory Bender as a guy full of jealousy and threats. She talked about some chilling messages Bender sent her, threatening to hurt Patrick if she didn't leave him. She even read one of those texts to the jury, showing how the danger was escalating. The prosecutors also presented the jury with some video footage caught by a private investigator. In these videos, Jessica and Bender were having meals together, appearing a bit too cozy. The prosecutors believed that Bender was trying to mess up Jessica and Patrick's relationship on purpose. Jessica, however, argued that those meetings were not romantic. They were how she tried to calm Bender down and prevent him from doing something worse. The defense, of course, tried to turn those videos against her. They suggested Jessica wasn't telling the truth about how close she really was to Bender. But Jessica stuck by her story that she hung out with him to make things not go even crazier. It just kept getting worse, too. The defense floated this far-fetched conspiracy theory involving Patrick's father, Max De La Cerda. They indicated that perhaps Max had something to do with the murder by pointing out a few holes in his alibi and making a suggestion that perhaps something related to Jessica was behind this. Max had no interest in this line of argument, however. He testified and denied everything, terming the accusations totally baseless. The defense was trying to corner him on the details of his movement on the day of the incident. However, Max stuck to his stand and maintained that he had nothing to do with what happened. The trial ran over 4 days, and, as the court days passed, more details of this intended murder were revealed, showing how skillfully it had been pulled off and how much it hurt those loved by the victim. One of the more surprising moments was when the ex-wife of Bender, Damara Sanchez, testified through an interpreter. She shared some important details, including an audio interview with Detective Weaver, where Bender outlines his plan to kill Patrick. This was the moment when Bender finally cracked, showing the first sign of emotion anyone had seen from him. Up till then, he'd been completely stone-faced. During a recess in the testimony, Bender did something that drew everyone's attention, mouthed, "I love you" to someone in the courtroom. But to whom? That remained a mystery. Then came the turn of the defense in the cross-examination of Detective Weaver. They turned on her hard, pointing out that forensic evidence like hair, skin, or DNA was not found at the crime scene. But the prosecution fired back with something solid: cell phone records. They showed that Bender's personal phone was linked to a burner phone that pinged off a cell tower near the murder scene. And on the morning of the murder, that burner phone made a crucial call, connecting Bender even more to the crime. Bender chose not to testify in his defense, and so the trial directly proceeded to closing arguments. The prosecutors drew a vivid scene of why Bender might have done it. They argued that he could not handle Jessica moving on with Patrick and that jealousy triggered murder. On the other hand, the defense tried to drive home the point that there was no physical evidence and that Bender's written murder plan was just some twisted fantasy, not proof he actually intended to kill. But it wasn't just the evidence that made the trial heavy. It was the emotional weight of what everyone had been through. Finally, when the jury announced its decision, Bender locked eyes with Jessica for one last time, his face giving away nothing. Jessica, however, did not even look at Bender as she addressed him. She let him know he lost everything and was going to have to live with what he did. And as you have guessed, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and under Florida law, that automatically translated to a life sentence without parole. Bender didn't flinch or change expression as the verdict was read. For Patrick's family and fiancée, hearing the guilty verdict brought a sense of justice they'd been waiting for, but it didn't erase the pain of their loss. But what do you think Gregory Bender actually wanted to do with Jessica? What was his plan after killing her fiancé? To reconcile with her forcibly at any cost? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. And let's be honest, due to the help of Damara Sanchez and the revelation of Bender's notes where he chalked out the whole murder plan, this case became a bit easier to solve for the detectives. But if you want to watch something really bizarre and unbelievable, just click on this video and see how God led to a sinister murder that no one could think of. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. See you soon?